the basilar membrane has physical properties that vary depending on the position along the basilar membrane. The beginning of the basilar membrane is known as the base. At the end, we have the apex. And the physical properties vary strongly. This enables the basilar membrane to separate the frequencies of the sound waves, as we will see later on. We also see that the basilar membrane, which is here, supports the inner and outer cells. Again, in this part, I will only deal with inner hair cells, and in a separate part, we will discuss the roles of the outer hair cells, the amplifiers of sound. As the sound wave reaches the inner ear, it also reaches the basilar membrane and causes displacement. So the basilar membrane is displaced. The sound wave has a given frequency, and as it reaches the basilar membrane, it generates a so-called traveling wave or standing wave. It has certain characteristics which we will discuss in the following slides. Now we see here in this beautiful animation how the basilar membrane is displaced by the incoming sound wave. Now this sound wave has a certain frequency, and it reaches the maximum of displacement in the basilar membrane, which is specific to the frequency of the sound wave. We will see in the next slides. Here we will discuss the characteristics of the traveling wave. This is a sound wave that causes displacement of the basilar membrane. This displacement is known as the traveling wave. Let's take a look at the characteristics of the traveling wave. Regardless of the frequency of the wave, the shape is almost identical. So it starts here, very low, and the amplitude builds up and reaches the maximum at the specific region of the basilar membrane that codes for the frequency of the sound wave. Assume we have a sound wave that has a frequency of 10 kilohertz. The sound wave starts here, very low. The amplitude builds up, and eventually it reaches here the peak. If the sound wave has a frequency of 10 kilohertz, the peak of this traveling wave will cause this amplitude at a point in the basilar membrane that also codes for 10 kilohertz frequency. If we had a frequency of the sound wave of 5 kilohertz, this peak will be reached at the point of 5 kilohertz. This means that the basilar membrane distinguishes between different frequencies of sound waves. We have a dynamic range between 20 kilohertz in the very beginning at the base and 10 hertz at the very end, at the apex. And this is due to different physical properties of the basilar membrane, among other things, as we will see in the next slide. So, the separation of the sound frequencies along the basilar membrane is known as tonotopic representation. The determinants are, first, physical properties, and second, neural encoding, as we will see in the following slides. But we will start off with the physical properties of the basilar membrane. Here we have the base, and here we have the apex. The base is narrower and thicker and stiffer than the apex. We see here the apex gets wider, thinner, and also softer. So here we have the stiffest region, and here we have the softest region. It is the variation of the physical properties along the basilar membrane that enables the basilar membrane to separate the frequencies of the sound, thereby generating the dynamic range in human ears, which is at the base about 20 kilohertz. This is the highest frequency, so the sound waves with the highest energy, with the highest frequency in human ears, about 20 kilohertz, they cause the displacement of the basilar membrane, the strongest displacement at the base. Along the cochlea, the frequency decreases. So, the sound waves with the highest frequency, with the highest energy, arrive at the base, and the sound waves with the lowest frequency, with the lowest energy, at the apex. This is the tonotopic representation, physical properties of the basilar membrane. We see here in this beautiful animation how the basilar membrane is deflected. here too. Now to the second principle of tonotopic representation, neural encoding. Assume we have a sound wave with 1.6 kilohertz. So it causes the traveling wave, which peaks at a point in the basilar membrane, which is connected to a neuron that also codes for 1.6 kilohertz. If the traveling wave reaches the peak at 800 hertz, we have here a neuron in the basilar membrane that codes for the frequency of 800 hertz, and so on and so forth for the other frequencies as we see here. So this is the second principle, neural encoding. Now these neurons form the cochlear nerve. They take this information all the way to the auditory cortex, where we have the same frequency coding. I will discuss this also in a separate part.